Okay, so now let's continue with the texturing. This part it's gonna be really short since we dedicated so much time on the sculpting process. The workflow that I use for texturing my rocks, it's really straightforward. For now I'm just gonna switch to standard brush, remove the alphas, then I'll click on the RGB and I'll select some neutral color, something that will give the base for our mesh, something like that. And then I'll just click fill color, but first we need to make sure that the polypaint, yeah, it's enabled. Okay, so fill objects, and now we are ready to import our textures. So for the texturing part, I prefer to use very uniform looking textures. I'll show you what I mean. So go to the texture tab, click import. Now here I prepared some nice textures that I think it would be really helpful for this prop. What I mean by uniform looking is that all of these textures doesn't have very rough or dark areas in them, so that way you can really allow the normal map of the prop to really add its own details instead of just using already baked into the diffuse texture details that are not sculpted on the prop. So yeah, I think that for starters this texture is really nice. So just select her, click on the Add to Spotlight button. I prefer to decrease a little bit of the opacity since I already know how this texture looks. I don't really need to... I need to see better the prop underneath this spotlight window. So let's just get started. I guess most of you have already worked with the spotlight. With the Z you switch between the wheel that you can move the window with the texture around, and you can resize, scale, do all stuff, and by clicking Z again you are in the paint mode, and now all you need to do is RGB intensity is at 100, and you should make sure that the Z add or the Z sub buttons are disabled. We don't want to paint any geometry anymore, we just want to paint the vertex color. And just start painting, and by pressing Shift Z you can very easily on the fly switch hide the spotlight window so you can see what the rock is starting to look like. So don't worry if you get some stretches that and you don't have enough time to spend on fixing these stretches. If they're a tiny amount, we're gonna fix later the texture inside Photoshop. So yeah, don't worry if you miss some of these spots here where the texture stretches out. That's okay. So some of these textures I try to make them in the same color gamma and the same saturation, so we can easily experiment and switch between them to add variety on our rock. For example, this one is really interesting. It gives this grainy rock surface. I think we can paint some moss on our rock. I think it could look good. Of course, you can always add moss on your props by just adding blending layer. This is something that we will discuss later in the CryEngine, but the blending layers use two textures, and that means that it's more heavy for processing. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna put some moss later on some parts of this rock. I think it would look good later in CryEngine, especially if you have some forest area with some trees around. It could look very nice. And you can see now why I put I baked this base cover on the rock, because if you miss some spot in spot white on the mesh and you don't texture it, it will get this white color on it when we bake later the vertex color map inside XNormal. So it's good to have this underlying darker color that will help blend it more easily with the texture itself. So yeah, after I'm finished with this texture, I'll probably switch to 2 or 3 other textures just to break up and add some more variety of the rock surface, because yeah, only one texture doesn't matter how good it looks, it's not usually enough to give the rock really nice look. It's a good idea to mix them up with different opacity values. And for now, as you can see, the diffuse is looking kind of flat on the model, but don't worry, in the next videos we're gonna prepare ambient occlusion maps, and that will really help bring out the volumes in the sculpted mesh, so it will definitely look better later on. Now on the top part I'll probably paint some moss, but regardless, it's good to have this base texture underneath. So as you know, spot white, the detail of your polypaint depends on the mesh density. That is something that really differentiates ZBrush and Modbox, because the Modbox works with the UV coordinates. So even if you have something like 200 triangle mesh, you can paint perfectly detailed texture map on it. That is one thing that Modbox is actually better, because to paint a detailed texture in ZBrush you need a wall of triangles. But yeah, regardless, it's still a very quick and efficient system, the Spotlight I mean, to quickly prepare your mesh diffuse texture. Later we can always add more detail inside Photoshop. Then you just save very quickly, and now I'll try to apply some of the other textures just to break up and add some variety. Let's see, this one I think we should decrease the opacity of the RGB intensity, something like 25 I think. Okay, so now let's see how it will look combined with the previous texture. As you can see, they're different in colors, so that's why I decreased the opacity. Yeah, I'll just add a little bit of this texture. Later in Photoshop we can easily unify the color range. So, but yeah, even now it doesn't look that bad. These different gray and brown values, they're not so different that it will look strange. On the contrary, they add some very nice variety. And even this mixing up of the textures I prefer doing inside Photoshop. But the reason I'm doing it here, it's so that I can have a quick layout of the different textures. So when I see the later on the wall poly, when I see the UV patches inside, I can very easily guess which part is on the top with a moss on it, and so on and so on. It's just for a visual aid. And something that I like to do inside CryEngine, I like to have one normal map for a prop, but to prepare two totally differently looking diffuse textures, so I can just switch between them. And when you have two different diffuse textures, even if you have the same prop, you can add a lot of variety. For example, the one prop can have a lot of moss and the other none at all. Okay, so let's say that we're ready with the sides of the prop. Let's just quickly add some moss and continue to exporting the high poly mesh. Okay, so this texture is really saturated, but I don't know, I think it could still work well. For painting moss, you can apply different techniques inside ZBrush. For example, you can very easily go to masking and just do something like click on mask peaks and valleys, and then just when you start painting, you'll see that you paint only on the unmasked parts. So this way you preserve some sharp edges and not get they won't get the other texture on them. Let me just clear the mask. Yes, as you can see now, we preserved these sharp edges. Yeah, I mean, it gives you a nice options to experiment when you texture your objects. Okay, we're gonna put some moss here. You can always click the view mask to uncheck it, so you can actually see what you're painting. Yeah, now maybe this effect is kind of too much because yeah, usually the moss doesn't get that separated. It grows even on the edges of the rocks, so this effect here is yeah, it's kind of overkill. So I'm just gonna remove the mask and paint with less RGB intensity again, moss on the cracks. Especially in the crevices, it's good to put moss there because in nature the moss gets they're very dense. So yeah, it's a good idea to have dense moss here in these crevices. Alright, let me just check mask by smoothness. Yeah, I didn't really do anything interesting for now, so maybe I can use this one. Okay, I think we're close to finishing. Yeah, we can put some moss here, this slope. I'll just remove for now this mask and I'll just continue painting like this. Even if it doesn't look perfect here in ZBrush, we can very easily tweak later in Photoshop the moss, so it will look it will look better. Alright, let's add a bit more moss here. Now here, this is a good way to add some variety of this big flat surface just by adding some of these rock moss parts on it. Yeah, while painting, you can just try to paint the moss in a different manner. Like for example, here I'm doing these streak lines. That would give it a more interesting look. Okay, here let's add some more on this side. Now I think it's a good idea to paint a moss on the lower part of the rock. So that way, if you put it in a forest, for example, and there's a grass surrounding it, it will blend pretty nicely with the rest of the vegetation. Yep, starting to look pretty good. So again, I won't spend too much time painting on this because we have to move on with more important stuff. But as you can see, in a matter of minutes, you can very easily texture your prop inside ZBrush with only a handful of textures. You have to really choose the proper texture for your prop that you're doing, because even if the geometry is really nice, if you choose poorly the texture, it won't look very good. Okay, I'll just add a little more details here, and I think we're good to go. Okay, I think we're done here. So the only thing that's left right now, yeah, of course, oh yeah, I accidentally clicked divide geometry, but we don't really need denser mesh than 4 million, so I'm just gonna wait, and I'll just delete this subdivision level, because we don't really need this high level. This is good enough. Okay, so let's just save the project just in case, and now all we need to do is to export our high poly mesh. Okay, cool. So in the next video we'll prepare the wall poly mesh, and we'll start making the UV seams inside 3ds Max.